This is a session of the ASAP, American Society of Adaptation Professionals Funding and Finance Peer Learning Group. And this week we have Bobby Fishkin and Claudia Brenner to give us an overview and introduction to the concept of prevention derivatives. And in short, for those of you not familiar with this subject, that prevention derivatives fundamentally are about shifting the locus of risk management from paying out damages from natural disasters and climate hazards after the fact to actively preventing such hazards in the first place by reallocating assets under management, whether a bank, whether insurance company, municipal government, or any entity. So with that already established, why not take it away, Bobby and Claudia?
Phenomenal. Thank you so much for inviting us to share. Delighted to speak to this important concept and grateful for this context. So just to share as background context, there has been tragedy of the commons with regards to resilience for an extended period. And we have been learning from the history of where the instruments that have been used to address this have had limits, and trying to design a fit-for-purpose structure for how we finance resilience at the scale that is missing for communities. So a little context to say before I go to slides, and Claudia and I share in live portion, but presentation-wise, but just to share, I started working on the question of when do we have additionality, i.e. when can we show the difference between the world as it would be without our intervention for resilience and the world as it is with our intervention for resilience. Back 9 years ago, when I looked at the social impact bond feasibility study in Marin County Health Department context, and what struck me was that the tools we have to finance resilience, whether or social innovation even, are structured in ways that are not always fit for purpose, in the sense that if you look at social impact bond, it's magic bullet structure to have one solution rather than a portfolio of approaches that are needed to achieve an outcome when you have an intractable challenge. And when we looked at advanced market commitments, likewise, these are static structures. They're not as elastic as the community's needs for resilience are. There is some context that I'll share for terminology's sake. The global risk transfer market system is what the current system is insurance, linked securities, reinsurance, and all of these connected dimensions of risk are actually separately financed today. And what we're aiming to do is approach this in a holistic way to allow for financing at the scale of resilience needs. And we think that can create resilience dividends for stakeholders in terms of prevention of their risk through positive externalities that resilience drives. And what we've done is establish that there are outcomes that create domino effects for stakeholders in terms of other benefits, and that we can see the causal relationship in the science and in the literature review of the resilience interventions. And then we can apply a portfolio of social innovations at the scale and scope of what communities need. And we think that can allow us to shift from a world in which we're transferring the risk to the 7 corners of the earth to cover the risk, a world in which we're preventing the pollution per capita of catastrophe events and achieving resilience for communities. So with that, I'm going to share transition to PowerPoint, unless Claudia has any introductory words prior.
No, go
Bobby,
for it.
Before you start your screen share, Bobby, we typically like to start off these meetings with some round robin updates from folks on the call of any finance updates that they might have. So if you could take a couple of minutes to do that. Michael, if you could get us kicked off, that would be great. And I'd also invite folks to just send a quick intro and say hello into the chat so you can see who's all here today. Thanks, Michael.
Sounds great. Thank you all for joining. I'll just make this a quick update for today. Two of the big grants that recently became available or soon to become available. One, EPA's Clean School Bus opportunity. Normally, that's not one you think of around resilience. You think of it on the mitigation side, but in fact, it actually with bidirectional chargers and creating sort of resilient microgrids, there are real opportunities around resilience for the Clean School Bus opportunity. Also, one key opportunity from DOT that is becoming available relatively soon is a Reconnecting Communities pilot discretionary grant program. This is an opportunity to really help alleviate some of the transportation impacts to underserved and overburdened communities and really help increase the resilience in underserved areas. We do have several other opportunities as well as requests for information, namely around increasing the resilience of the electric grid. And so I encourage all of you to check out the document, add in any that you know of, as well as submit applications if you have interest or if you work with communities that are interested. That will be the update for today. Don't want to take too much time, but happy to answer any questions you all might have.
And if anyone else has updates, you're welcome to share them now. You can feel free to unmute. We'd love to hear any updates you have.
So we have a general federal funding list for the peer learning group. It's linked in the notes in the agenda, and feel free to add to it before or after any meeting. I'll put the link here in the chat as well. But yeah, feel free to take a look through as well if you are looking for any financial or financing opportunities or know of any resources that would work with that list as well.
Jonathan, thank you so much for creating the list. For folks that might be new here, and I know you just started this list, can you just give us like a quick overview of what's included on this list to help people think what they could add to it or what they should be using it for?
Sure. I can share my screen for a couple minutes if that's all right.
Sure.
So we have a list of currently available opportunities or financial assistance opportunities, federal grants. We have the name, brief description, some who might be eligible, as well as how much might be eligible and the deadline. And it goes down through some of the things that Michael was talking about earlier. We have RFIs sent out by various agencies, and these are all submitted by members of this group. So feel free to add more that you might know about. We have resources. These are just general resources that will tell you about financial opportunities or terms or terminology. And then, of course, as things start to close, we'll move them down into these lists below, but you can always take a look at these for wording on previous opportunities that came around as well. So, yeah.
Thanks, Jonathan. So the link to that doc is in the chat. So if folks have things to add or want to share this resource, please let us know if you have any questions.
Teresa, you had something to add, or?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I think the mute just went off. I'm not sure how that happened, but actually I will say that this is a great resource. I've just been perusing through it. Thank you very much for sharing this and hoping to be able to contribute.
Maybe I could just add then, this is Joyce with Climate Resilience Consulting. Part of the reason why we organized it a little bit further is that people outside of this group are seeking this information. And I did want to offer that anyone who is looking for this for other parts of your work, hopefully this will become a resource. And it's only as good as, of course, as Jonathan mentioned, all the input that you all share. But for instance, there's a membership group of state governors that is trying to stay ahead of what's happening with the federal resources. And they were looking for this kind of a all the news that's fit to print about where the resources are coming. And just a reminder that if you were present at some of our earlier meetings of this group, the Ready to Fund Resilience Toolkit which the American Society of Adaptation Professionals led with Climate Resilience Consulting's help, does include a list as of January of 2022 that's very complete in terms of where the federal monies are currently flowing. But of course, lots has happened in the 4 months since then. But certainly do avail yourself of the toolkit and those sorts of resources. And I'll put in the chat exactly where that's located. Thank you.
I just sent that, Joyce. Thank you. And then Yangbo, I think I'll kick it back over to you if no one has any other updates.
Okay, then that's great. If no one has any updates here, while we get back to Bobby, Claudia, you have anything to preface before Bobby gets his slides up?
Oh, I just wanted to say hello, everyone, and I'm just really grateful to be here. Look forward to meeting some of you. And I am co-lead with Bobby in this venture. So thank you. Thanks.
Excellent. And now, Bobby, go ahead and continue.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate the container you all have established with this today. Thank you for inviting us to share. So catastrophic wildfire risk reduction is something where we want to backcast from a specific future, talking about how there are fire basins, there are air basins, there are water basins. If we talk about what part of the risk has spread across stakeholders who are powerless to address it. I think the 40 years of willingness to pay studies show that people say that if they could pay a specific dollar amount per day of orange skies reduced per year, they would, whether it's $80 per day or $350 per day. Studies have shown it, but no one's giving them that product or service on the market at the air pollution basin level. They're only being offered it at the, if you own the property level. But there's millions of renters who are also suffering catastrophic air pollution, and they're humans too. And there's also Fortune 500 companies affected from interruptions. So what we're offering is a bridge to a 50% per capita per year annual risk reduction of air pollution from wildfire per a specific region. Or if we got to the point where this was resourced, whether through public sector, private sector collaborations at the right scale, this is possible as a strategy everywhere. And that's what we're aiming at. So how do we get there? Well, we want catastrophic wildfire prevention that is at the scope of our collective challenges. The problem I mentioned with the social impact bond model 8 years ago I was studying is that, that's only ownable by family offices. We want to be able to create a financial architecture that can be at parity with all the stakeholders, where anchor stakeholders, rich stakeholders don't seem to be free riders, precluding every willingness to pay study from allowing resilience financing from being activated as latent demand that can be unleashed. So if we go here, we have dimensions of intervention. We have whether it's beavers and drought resilience, or goats and vegetation management, or arson prevention and community resilience, or looking at how we change the bark beetle populations in the case of healthy forest risks. We can talk about multiple interventions. We've had in our most recent grant application, as an example, 10 social enterprise applied with us for the grant because each of these were a different social innovator, and there's 40 other social innovator organizations that have additional interventions that we've been interviewing and dialoguing with to see how do we build a portfolio that allows us to achieve a net risk reduction per stakeholder. Now, we do think that derivatives have a context. Every time you talk about an insurance-linked security or reinsurance, it becomes a derivative as soon as it starts in the risk market of insurance. So that's why we talk about derivatives. Are derivatives ever ownable by the public? Yes, there are derivatives, like if the stock market goes down, derivative goes up, that tens of millions of people own. So it is possible to say, how do we bridge the risk industry from all the unstructured risk of stakeholders who care about this greatly but don't have a role? Well, we do that by designing a financial architecture by which in the case of large institutions, their cost of inaction is used to pay for the opportunity for prevention. So we think that this is possible. Risk management has changed to embrace positive risk. Goes back hundreds of years. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, Ben Franklin's narrative. And, you could see this if we talk about the dimensions. These are just some, you also have 1% increase of premature birth rate per capita per day of exposure. But if you see here, we can see, per unit of pollution, what is the effect on population? And so, in the case of a region of millions of people, talk about the Bay Area, for example, you can identify thousands of deaths preventable through resilience strategies over an extended period of time. And you can identify tens of thousands of hospitalizations preventable from just reducing the risk by half, not eliminating the risk. Because what we've seen is per capita, per dose of pollution, because more and more suburbs are burning, it's getting more catastrophic for health. Every year the studies get worse. So there's a study lag, and we think that there's an opportunity to bridge the environmental resilience, public health resilience as strategy. So this is because we see everything from bronchitis to IHD hospitalizations to layers of effects. This is not a comprehensive list. There are a growing diversification of studies because we now get in this pollution. We see in World War I, there was chemical warfare that killed 75,000 people with a chemical that is now one of the fastest rising chemicals in wildfire smoke. So, we're exposing each other as humans in California, for example, to the chemical warfare tools of World War I. And yet we could, through resilience, aim at a 50% net risk reduction in pollution. So, this can be connected through offsetting, there's 25 times more aquifer space underground in California to store water without losing it to evaporation than there is above ground storage. And if we can offset what we're taking out of the underground and rebuild our reserves of that, then we can end up with a consequential rehydration that reduces risk of burning. And beavers are effective drought reduction tools. There's a ecosystem of tools. I think this is Claudia. I think we're at 11, right?
Yeah, sounds good.
Do you want to share screen, or should I keep? Do you want to tell me next slide? Next slide.
Why don't you keep on it? And actually, why don't we do that? Yeah, why don't you keep sharing?
Okay, I'll keep sharing. Go ahead.
You know what? Actually, maybe I should share because I can't really see it very well.
Okay.
Yeah, so
that's good.
Yeah, thanks. It was a good idea. Okay. Yeah, hang on. Thank you, though.
Thank you all.
Let's see if I can. Well. Okay, sorry, I'm not super familiar with Google SlideShare. Okay. Over there, good. Thank you so much, Bobby. So what I'm going to be talking about is some of the implementation, the beginnings of the actual implementations of this vision. So with CrowdDoing, we're beginning to start working with the community. So we have a local pilot, and we also Bobby's collected just this huge set of consortium partners. He mentioned that there was a bid that 10 partners bid together. So we're have another grant that's coming up, and we're going to be doing a similar thing. So the idea is that we can align to the landscape, the region, the community, whatever level. And part of what CrowdDoing can do is to help with strategic planning, integrate the partners, and measure some outcomes as well as the community engagement. And so I won't go through everything on this slide, but think about it as an assessment that goes from the beginning through the end. and we can help with different data collections, you know, in the weather systems and some statistics and all that, data science. And then one of the other things we're looking at is looking at the costs and the benefits as well. So yeah, I think, you know, we're really spending a lot of time with this extended network. Let's go to the next slide. So recently, one of our partners, Guidewire, and they are also using a software, Black Swan Analytics. We started at the recommendation of a fire chief at OR in Santa Clara County in California, a pilot with a little community called Aldercroft Heights, right? This is 127 homes, and it's a perfect place. Unfortunately for them, they're super high risk. And I don't know if I can draw on this, but if you see here in this aerial, yeah, well, I guess not. Anyways, there's 3 canyons, and I am no expert on all this land piece, but I'm learning a lot very quickly that that's not a good thing for fire, that the fires, you know, travel very quickly up the slopes. And you can see on this bottom right-hand side, a lot of the houses, you know, all these specks, well, that's where people live. So they're really living in what we call the wildland urban interface, right? And this is part of, you know, the challenge we have, you know, in the United States and elsewhere in the world is this huge, you know, migration to this area, right? So anyways, so the first time we went and visited, we actually got a tour. And in this place, this is actually part of this land is not just the community. Part of it's owned by a water group. And I can't remember if it's the San Jose group, but that's what I've heard. And what's really important here is you see how there's an evacuation route right in the middle, and they're talking about the residents and all. And notice that there's a lock here. Like if there is a fire, there's only a couple people that have a key to open this, right? And so that's just, I mean, when you go around in this town, they don't have a way for fire trucks to come in. The roads aren't wide enough, and they don't have an evacuation route out. And they don't have a shelter in place plan. So we're helping them to put all of that together. And this just a picture here. They have fire hydrants all over the area that are just for the fires. And we went to a barbecue a couple of weeks ago, May 1st, and this is a very active community. They have a Firewise community, and they're really trying to do a lot of things very quickly to help the area. And we talked about diverse stakeholders, and there were 5 fire people there who actually know the community and are working with them. And so, you know, they're doing as much as they can. The Santa Clara Fire Safe Council is there, and we're here on the right. I mean, you can't see it that well, but Guidewire is helping to sponsor this. This is a company that does insurance software. But one of the things that was done is each home got an individual home assessment of actually what their risk was. And so when we were talking with all of these neighbors, it was amazing because they're all getting dropped from their insurance. And so Tammy Schwartz, who's you know, our connection to Black Swan Analytics and Guidewire, basically is helping them to write, because she's worked with the insurance industry, is helping to write, gave a template for people to use to appeal their denial, right? So now they don't even have fire insurance, right? So if the fire comes, they don't have a way to protect themselves. So we're helping them that way. There's going to be help with signs and all kinds of stuff. And this is something that is from the Black Swan Analytics. Each of the homes gets their assessment. I won't go into all the details, but they also get recommendations as to what they can do. And what's interesting, and this is all the Black Swan, and Hazard Hub is actually Guidewire. Basically, there's this data that they have that they look at, you know, what is the level of danger? There's 6 elements that's put into the system. And you can see the whole thing's red in this example. But with additional elements of data, it's easier to get a more targeted view of the location. Now, this is mainly homes. It's not looking at the land. And so one of the things that we're doing is we're also looking at land. I'll talk about that in a second. This is another partner, Willow Labs, and they have an assimilation treatment. So we're looking to bring them in to not just look at the this on the left, sorry, is just an example of a place without a fuel treatment. And on the right, you can actually see there's this red line. So they're actually looking at what would happen if you put a fire break in there. So when I showed you the original picture of that aerial, we're now talking to them about bringing sheep in. And Aaron, who's part of CrowdDoing, is an expert in goats. And so we're looking at the various, we're expanding from home hardening and, basic defensible space things to add things that Bobby was talking about earlier. We're looking at the hydration systems and things like that. And we're just starting. So we're putting in these bottom line metrics. And we're helping them to write a community wildfire protection plan. And one of the things that's actually, it's not so simple, but we're looking at like some of the baselines, like how can we put the baselines when they put the assessments in? How can we measure the results? And did we really reduce risk, right? So that's the goal. And yeah, so let's see. Yeah, additional support resources. One of the things that's interesting, we also have a toolkit, which I can mention, that we're working with Arise, and they're part of the United Nations. Bobby connects, he always explains it better than I do. But one of the things that's interesting is in these plans that the research now is done, it's kind of more like, it's like a report, right? And it does have some action plans, but to the extent that these plans are implementable, there's a lot of opportunity to make them, the minute they get done. In Santa Clara, the last one that was done was in 2016. So it's 2022. And the one that they're doing now is taking 18 months, right? And this was a lot of people working on this. So how can we do this faster? We can't afford that kind of time. How do we accelerate this timeline? Anyway, so that's what we're looking to do with the work that we're doing here, and also, on the ground, and also in this United Nations toolkit. So, yeah, trying to think what else.
And Claudia and Bobby, just want to let you know we're hoping to move to discussion at 35 after.
Yeah, I'm basically complete. So
I can show the Deschutes. Yeah, I was just going to show the slide for Deschutes here. Shall I present here? Oh, it says it can't because it's presenting.
Oh, here. You can share. Yeah, one second.
So just want to bridge here because I think this will help with folks. The existing model that exists. I can share screen it if you want, because the shoots was, there we go. Okay. So just the existing model has been financed by governmental funding historically. And this is the best case study of a comparison point in history to what we're doing, although we're trying to do this further at a different level, because you can see on the left, they did these social innovations, regenerative approaches in some cases, in the case of what they did in Oregon. And then you can see on the right that had a corresponding reduction in fire size in the treatment area and versus the study area, control group, basically. And so if we think about the financing of that in each community, then what we're dealing with is a context in which we have a history of payments for ecosystem services, with a question of how do those become inherent to the products and services that are missing in community. What we found is that the resilience financing that has existed has not fully intersected the so-called parametric conversation in finance. In insurance, parametrics are when you have guaranteed through an intermediate outcome the long-term outcome in a domino effect in terms of causality, and therefore you can approximate damages lost. But it's also the same principle is applicable to saying, can we show that there's a prevention of the future risk, like the Deschutes example I shared? When we do show that there's a net, for example, 17% net risk reduction to stakeholders, then crop yield insurance, multi-hazard peril insurance, life insurance, health insurance, every type of insurance that is affected, the covered risk can change, because you can show that you can change the instead of transferring the risk and spreading the risk around, you could say, what is the opportunity for preventing the risk, and how does that compare to transferring the risk? And if it's more cost efficient to prevent the risk at community risk reduction, then the whole insurance reinsurance sector should invest more in it. Likewise, Fortune 500 companies have shadow priced carbon, and they could shadow price other kinds of risk when they prevent it. If they invest $100 million into the market, there's a return on that. But if they invest $100 million into preventing their own risk through resilience, we can also show them a return on that, because we can show them what is their cost if they've self-insured life insurance for their employees, what is their cost if they've self-insured health insurance for their employees, and what is their proportion of the benefits, what is their proportion of the heart attack prevention dividends, stroke prevention dividends, business interruption avoidance dividends for them. So the concept of prevention derivatives is to take Eleanor Ostrom's narrative of tragedy of the commons prevention. We then brought the Oxford University Systems Change Society to interview. We introduced them to 75 insurers and reinsurers. We then worked with Columbia Graduate School Pro Bono Club to build a goat simulation of what are all the financial benefits for every stakeholder from goats. And turns out there's 360,000 goats and sheep who are unemployed in California 6 months a year. And if you just put the goats and sheep to work, you'd actually have a resilience benefit from that. So we are looking at the future tech and the future financing needed to establish both nature-based solutions with ancient history and bring them into a modern resilience and adaptation portfolio of interventions that can allow communities to achieve that risk reduction. Now, I remember that we were told to stop speaking at about now, so I want to express gratitude for the space to share and looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Bobby and Claudia. So first, do we have any immediate questions? Feel free to unmute, and also like to get some commentary from David Dodd, who is also part of Arise, as Bob and Claudia mentioned. So first, any questions, or David or anyone, feel free to jump in.
I'll go ahead. You know, you don't have to ask me twice, Yangbo. This is such an existential issue. This is affecting places around the world, and I'm right now in discussions with economic development groups in New Mexico. But the thing that I love about this is it's addressing things that you don't think about. You don't think about the long-term health costs. You don't think about the enormous amount of carbon that's released into the atmosphere in these events. You think about the damages. You certainly think about people who lose everything. And I've said this many times, and then I'll shut up. The thing about wildfire versus hurricanes, tornadoes, even earthquakes, is wildfires consume everything. They leave nothing. And you know, they leave nothing that is not concrete and steel, and even then they can warp steel. They are all consuming. And so looking at it from this vantage and this really great idea, and Claudia, I met you, I really applaud you for this. You guys are really great. I think is huge. Now I'll be quiet.
Excellent for the intervention. And before we get a response, Tess, so you had a comment about the goats and sheep. So go ahead with that, and Bobby and Claudia will respond after.
I think that comment was a bit more of a jest, but I'll maybe add a question or further comment to Claudia. But I do think it's great to see finding some of those local solutions, like resources like the goats and sheep. So I mean, there's a bit of a jest, but also some reality there. So thank you for that. A question I may have just to follow up is when you were mentioning about the local community and the very clear picture with the gate that is locked. And just the work that you're doing on the ground. I've seen some of that just with previous work in other countries, miscommunication between planning departments and emergency management, where you've got roads that are just a little too small for emergency vehicles, things like that. Is that, also when you're talking about getting the stakeholders together, is that, I'm assuming a critical piece of sort of the dialogue of putting together some of those contingency plans, and what are some ways that you found some success in approaching that and getting folks together to have some of those conversations across those different sectors. So just kind of curious if you had any thoughts on that, and if there are some places outside the US that you might be looking to or have already done some of this work as well.
Excellent tests. And before we get to responses, Joyce, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Oh, this was so interesting. Thank you. I'm learning a lot. And I'm also still struggling to understand it. And I'm wondering, therefore, if Bobby, you could help me to just say, in the event that this moves forward, who will bring the money, through what vehicle, and then where will the money go? So, who's
Sure.
doing it, how, and to whom?
So let me identify that as anchor stakeholders are the ones who are bringing the first capital to the problem, because they can recognize their self-interest, whether it's a major insurer, reinsurer, or a large employer, or a public sector entity could be an anchor stakeholder. Let's talk about them loosely as any individual anchor stakeholder might have 0.5% of the overall net risk or more. And collectively, we might bring a group of them together that own 10 or 20 or 30 or 50% of the net risk. If we take it as percentage of the structured risk, there's also the unstructured risk too that can come up. But you could talk about if you do it on a cash flow basis, that's the insurance reinsurance sector. If you do it at a shadow pricing basis, that's heart attacks prevented, strokes prevented, cancer prevented, health impacts. That's Fortune 500s in the mix. So taking as an example, you get a major subset of these organizations convened by us, or we partner with the UN already with ARISE, but we could partner with other branches of government to convene the anchor stakeholders and get a sufficient critical mass of anchor stakeholders to say, yeah, we recognize our self-interest in preventing, because goats, the Columbia team showed us, have 100x ROI in terms of wildfire prevention, right? So if goats have 100x ROI and a company owns 0.5% of the net risk, then you could show them how they get 50% on their money faster than they get it on Russell 3000, right? That's possible at that level. The idea is once you have anchor stakeholders committed, and then you have the financing committed for region XYZ, you then have a magnet for every adjacent region to say, hey, please prevent our risk too, whether it's the beavers or the goats or the fire-resistant landscaping or the other interventions in the mix. Extend this, you get the anchor stakeholder in the town over, the anchor stakeholder 2 towns over to say, oh, grow the prevention consortium here and reduce our net risk too. And so the idea is it's a structure that is able to expand elastically as anchor stakeholders join. Once the anchor stakeholders have joined, then 40 years of willingness to pay evidence and research kicks in, because those studies all have this gigantic caveat the size of the universe, which is they would be willing to pay if they don't perceive the people who are the organizations that are most at benefit from it from being all free riders. If they think everybody is generally a free rider, it fails. Now, people recognize that some percentage of free riders will always exist, and some, just like they, don't expect a world that is perfectly optimized. But you can't have it be, where you ask, middle-class individual family to start paying for prevention of the whole community, and they look at the biggest companies in the world over there behind them, and they're like, well, they're not doing their part, so why should I, right? That logic breaks it down. So in order to scale the logic of preventing catastrophe through the kinds of frameworks Eleanor Ostrom designed, but then need to be turned into financializing the prevention, validating the prevention has occurred at the parametric point of internalization of the future externalities, and connecting that to all the stakeholders who benefit. They need to recognize their self-interest. So you could even say a reinsurer could offer a Fortune 500 company a guarantee. If you put up $100 million, you could make money faster than you could put it in the Russell 3000 through valuing your own mitigation benefits, right? But none of the big companies in the world are calculating well, the bulk of our interventions, not just the example that I could use to say they're not calculating the goats and sheep that could prevent their catastrophe because they're not thinking about it. It's not only that, it's the whole mix of them they're not looking at, because they're not looking at that except as a cost of doing business. They're accepting it as a cost of doing business. They're not connecting to transforming every, they should be saying, every rich area, rich neighborhood should be saying, what are within X miles, every region that is poor but needs resilience that we share a risk with, how can we finance the goats and sheep and every other intervention there? Same with every Fortune 500 company. Anchor stakeholders and affluent communities should be able to create a cascade of prevention around them based on their self-interest. And that's not happening at scale. Does that help? Claudia, there was a question for you too from Aldercroft related.
Okay. Do you want to read it, Bobby? Or because I'm...
No, it wasn't read. It was a spoken one
Yes,
prior.
exactly. So to reiterate,
About relationships and things like that? Is that what that was? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Repeat that. That's cool. Go ahead.
I have some experience, and then I think Bobby has some good stuff that he's been working on. On this local level, it's really challenging actually, because people have different levels of participation, right? Some people are super active, some people aren't. I didn't show a picture because there's actually a map with each person's house and who's taking care of their yard and who's not. And there are landowners who are helping. The evacuation route goes through people's homes. Anyways, so it's tricky. However, I think at this point, the fear is so great for so many people that unfortunately the tide's shifting that way. But one of the people that we're working with who fortunately took a permaculture training is in this, core group. So that's how partially we're getting to be able to do a larger view with the goats and the hydration. So we're really lucky to have these people. They're amazing to work with. But she was saying, I want to write up like how to engage with people, right? Because it is an art and it's not simple. And so that's, I think, the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges that we have. But it is happening. We're going to be introducing these people to the different folks, it's already happening. Now they're in touch with the insurance people. That wasn't happening before. Now we're in touch. We're going to put them more. They're already working with the local water people, but there's a more strained relationship at the county level. So it really takes all these levels to come together. But even on the insurance level, and Bobby can talk about this, is that there's one person who was working in California's commission who now is putting together incentives that people, if they work together, they can actually get discounts in those groups. So they're kind of getting the idea that it's the synergy of the whole that's actually going to make the difference. And Bobby,
thank you.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No worries. Yeah, thank you, Claudia, for that. Just want to make sure Bobby has a moment to add anything further before we move to Karina and Michael.
I think it's a really important thread. How does every fractal of community, whether it's a neighborhood or a county or a state, reclaim agency with regards to catastrophe prevention? And I think that at that context, it is possible for that to happen. But there's a series of processes that haven't let that happen thus far, and that's what we're trying to fix. Thank you, Ingo.
Excellent. Now, Karina and then Michael.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for that presentation. It's really interesting. I'm curious if you both can say a little bit more about the difference or benefits of tapping into a derivative market via insurance versus a bond structure. Something that's gotten a lot of buzz in California, at least, is Blue Forest Resilience Bond, which has similar aims and seems to have a similar kind of ethos. But I'm curious about the pros and cons of those two different financial mechanisms when thinking about wildfire prevention.
So I would
Michael,
differentiate a couple things.
Before we get to Bobby, Michael first, you have a question?
I'll just let that question. Mine, I did my undergrad thesis on Eleanor Ostrom. Love her and her work, but I was just kind of curious and it might be a little bit longer of a question, but how do you contrast that with like Vincent Ostrom and his work on the Western legal traditions and how that impacts who's actually a stakeholder and like the work of the water boards and the like?
Yep, go ahead, Bobby.
So a couple things. Look, we've been working on the 30 universities researching with us that did work with us already and looking at the cost of inaction and the opportunities for action, right? And at that level, they're in theory, putting aside Blue Forest for a second, if the county of Santa Clara or Marin or Alameda wanted to raise tax-exempt money and do so through the existing tax-exempt bond system and spend it on wildfire prevention, we're all for that at the level of bonds in general. That doesn't necessarily create a long-term sustainable funding source fully aligned with stakeholders at risk, but it's certainly, we're not against bonds as a way to capitalize prevention. The Forest Resilience Bond has an agreement with the government that does not allow additionality, i.e. they are not allowed to claim that they change how much prevention has happened in their region in terms of risk reduction versus what would have happened otherwise. They're not allowed to claim that the US government's timeline has changed in terms of the prevention that would happen with the money versus what would happen without the money. They're not able to have a causal attribution. So they're not able to have investors in the process that are from the stakeholders at risk. They do have a financing basically from the water stakeholders, and water quality financing of wildfire prevention is great. We're all for it. And as much wildfire prevention can get financed through water quality benefits and the bond market of that's terrific. We want that to scale too. But it doesn't mean that that's structured so that we can have the additionality required to get all the other insurance, reinsurance, and Fortune 500 stakeholders, as well as ordinary members of the public, to have firm additionality, i.e. can they say that there is a net risk reduction compared to what would have happened without their money? Can they see that causal attribution? And if they can, then it becomes closer to like the solar market where they pitch you to buy the solar based on what fraction of your energy bill they save, or the rainwater harvesting market where they pitch you based on what fraction of your water bill could save. You'd have outcomes then that you'd be able to connect to it. Let me see if Claudia would like to comment, and I'll be back in 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think that's, I can't so much comment at the bond, versus derivative level. But I am seeing that it's going to take such a combination of things because of the different levels. Like, one group can get along, like the water group, they're working together at this local level, but if you take the fire groups, they're in touch with the water groups and the air groups, right? There's still a lot of fragmentation across those systems, right? But they're starting to work together. There's a chart that I'm working on that I didn't show, but Bobby talks about this connected risk. And once I think we start showing that all these risk factors are all together, they're not isolated, right? The property's not isolated from the health or the crops or the water systems or the air systems, right? Anyways, I don't think I'm adding the financial parts because I think that's yet to be worked out. I can't say like from a public announcement, but we are starting to work with an early sponsor. So I think, it's kind of like you never know where money's going to come from in some ways. That's what I've seen as being in sales, is that there is a group who's working now because it is an ESG type of project. It is in the interest of them to get the communities to work together, so that it's just barely starting to happen. So I think it's going to accelerate a lot.
Well, and what I would also say, the other part of the question that was asked was just that derivatives, everything that is, let's call it risk actuarially validated by the insurance industry at the beginning of the process, becomes a derivative if you start to transfer it or work towards its prevention structurally, legally, technically. However, the derivatives we have not been oriented towards investing in prevention of risk. they've been oriented towards investing in the prevention of a person's shareholding risk. The biggest traded derivative that 50 million people own is, if the market goes down, the derivative goes up. Okay, that prevents a specific risk. They haven't been adopted to resilience financing, which is where they're extremely needed. Anyways, thank you. I just wanted to add that.
Excellent. So first we'll go to David. He has his hand raised, and then followed by Wendy and Jameson, in case they have any other questions from their comments in the chat. So, and Patty as well. So we'll take these four. David, you go first.
Yeah, and part of what you said, Bobby, relates to this, but you talked about the insurance industry and insurance parametric products we all know about. How engaged have you been able to get, both of you, Claudia, been able to get the insurance industry in looking at this? Because I know, and I would love to introduce you to, if you haven't met him already, Richard Seeline, because he's all over this and has the interest of both the insurance and reinsurance industry in looking at how they can invest in these types of activities that can actively reduce their risk. Have you had any success with them?
We would love to talk to that person. I have not met them. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Again,
before you respond, we like to get the questions. We're in the top of hour. So Patty, you're the other one who has your hand raised. So go ahead.
Hey there. I think I was last in line, so I'm happy to wait. There were a couple of folks before me, I think, but what would you like to do?
Yeah, just go ahead. You go ahead, your question. There were two who had comments in the chat, so we'll get to.
Got it. I see. Okay, so Bobby, I'm really interested in the role of insurance, but I am confused by the focus on smoke and the related health effects as being, the goal to prevent wildfires and prevent smoke, since most of the wildfire practitioners that I know would say that it's very difficult to use capital effectively to just stop fires and stop smoke, but rather we can make very meaningful investments in living with wildfire, building better, the types of examples that are associated with your pilot.
Yeah, look, great.
Sorry.
Before you reply to that, just want to see if Wendy had some comments in the chat. So Wendy, if you don't mind unmuting, if you have anything to add to those comments.
Oh, no, you guys answered my question. I appreciate it.
Great, excellent. And yep, and Jameson, it seems like you got yours answered, unless you have something that come up at the last moment. Okay, then, see none. So Bobby, then, just go ahead. Just in the next 5 minutes, Bobby and Claudia, go ahead.
So I just wanted to bridge a couple things. I think that going downstream in terms of mitigation, the home hardening, defensible space is still upstream of the wildfire, so it still can have value. But going further upstream, community level risk reduction, rehydration, fuel load reduction in the case of goats, etc., has economically speaking more diversified beneficiaries and more consequences. Our analysis of the existing literature has been that there has been, let's say, a narrowness of what tools the experts have looked at, and they haven't cited each other's work at the level that other fields we found. We found many times fewer interdisciplinary citations between the people studying arson prevention, the people studying goats, the people studying beavers, the people studying resilience in terms of bark beetles. These are all separate fields that don't talk to each other very well, and the existing industry has been a bit captured by where the most economic short-term alignment between stakeholder interest of the upper middle class stakeholders and short-term risk prevention. So where, for example, home hardening. Millions of people have been able to home harden to some extent in the US over the last 30 years because there's an affluent market of people who can see their home is directly aligned to their interests. But the gap has been at the net risk reduction scale, where you're actually investing efficiently to prevent the overall net risk. That's where the research is broken down. The reason why we brought 2 undergraduate students together over the last 3 years to conduct this research thus far has been exactly that, to prove that net risk reduction is the right goal. And living with fire, yes, in terms of mid-intensity, low-intensity fire that exists in context that, we're not, even though the US government just put a pause on controlled burns for the next 3 months, we recognize that there's that was today's announcement. We recognize that there is a role for living with fire too. However, what we don't think there is a role for is living with catastrophic fire of the suburbs. We think that there is a role for saying we can achieve resilience and ecosystem services, and we can align to ecosystem services if we work towards collaborative resilience at landscape scale. And we think that that's possible. In terms of the reinsurance sector, Steve Weinstein, the former head of events for Reinsurance Association and former chief legal officer of Renaissance Re, has been collaboratively in dialogue with us and brought us into dialogue with some folks, including we had a great initial conversation with one of the big 4 accounting firms at his event that had a self-insurance program with the Fortune 500. So getting them to recognize that they have 40 years of stroke data, heart attack data, cancer data for their employees, and that could be used to benchmark resilience investments. But there's a lot more that we need to do to get the insurance and reinsurance sector on side. I'd say that we had initial framing from the Sustainable Insurance Forum, the UN regulator of insurance regulators, and then we had subsequent efforts now to have the former Deputy Insurance Commissioner of California has become an advisor of ours, so that's also been helpful. And we've also had collaboration with Tammy from one of parts of Claudia's presentation that you mentioned. One of y'all mentioned that she was the former head of chief underwriter for Fair Plan in California, and that's also an insurance expert. But that's the beginning of it, but we need a lot more. Let me go to Claudia.
Excellent. Yeah, Claudia, 30 seconds to a minute to close, and we'll yield to Beth, Brianna, and Joyce to wrap the session.
Yeah, great. I agree with what Bobby said. And I think, we have to live with fire, but how we do it is what's really important. That's what I'd say. Thank you.
Excellent. So thank you very much again, Claudia and Bobby, for sharing your insights with us. And of course, you've raised quite helpfully a lot more questions and answers, which is, at least given the stage of where prevention derivatives are at right now, is going to be positive. It's a good outcome here. So now to wrap up, since we're at the top of hour, turn to Brianna, Beth, or Joyce for any closing remarks.
I think we're all set, Yangbo. Thanks so much to Bobby and Claudia for joining us today. And I see that Bobby just put his email in the chat. Claudia, I'd invite you to do the same. And we'll be sending out a follow-up email that will have the recording from today, our notes, and then I'd also ask Bobby or Claudia if you could send over the slides so we can get that out to the group. And if you have additional questions, we'll share Bobby and Claudia's emails. And if any folks want to stay on, we can hang out here for a few more minutes if anyone has follow-up questions.
And I would just add that Climate Resilience Consulting is so thrilled to host this convening every month. And we really encourage you to reach out to your peers to invite them to attend. And especially because all of us rely upon ASAP to help keep us on the bleeding edge, including with this extraordinary content that we've just heard from our colleagues. We really do suggest that you become members of ASAP and encourage others to do so this as well, because our community is only as strong as its extraordinary members. So thanks so much to ASAP for holding the vessel of these incredible ideas, and to Bobby and Claudia for expanding that vessel and what we all can do to help one another. Thanks so much.